The Bogosity Podcast, early and ad-free. Become a subscriber at Patreon, Subscribestar, or Discord. Use the links at donate.bogosity.tv.
Welcome to the Bogosity Podcast for the week of July 12, 2026. The podcast that'll never have to say goodbye again. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's prorate the news of the bogus. Let's start out with an update to a story we've been covering for over 14 years. Dotcom is the creator of Mega Upload, which was called a file-sharing site, but we've always maintained was the first cloud service. Because every single feature they complained about in Mega Upload also exists in Dropbox. Mega Upload was accused of being a haven for pirates, and Dotcom himself accused of making millions profiting from copyright infringement. So the United States took out a criminal warrant and applied to Dotcom's home country of New Zealand to extradite him to the United States. Despite the fact that Dotcom has never been to the United States and never had a business there. Also, despite the fact that there's no such thing as secondary criminal copyright infringement in either the United States or New Zealand. The case has survived multiple administrations, starting during the Obama years and persisting through Trump, Biden, and now in the second Trump administration. The engine of the copyright cartels keeps going, regardless of who's in charge. The case has slowly moved up and down the New Zealand courts, with one loss after another for Dotcom. In 2020, the New Zealand Supreme Court, I guess we can call them scons, said that Dotcom could be extradited, not should, and also said that Dotcom can fight it. Now, Dotcom is fighting the extradition on two grounds. The first is the fact that the police commissioner has refused to charge him in New Zealand. The second is Justice Minister Paul Goldsmith's 2024 decision to extradite him. The High Court rejected his challenges, and now New Zealand's Court of Appeal has also ruled on the matter, rejecting all of his challenges. But once again, these challenges are good! They should be convincing to anyone with a brain! The decision has a ton of legal speak, but basically amounts to, we don't want to piss off the Americans. The criteria is whether or not it would shock the conscience of the average New Zealander. But I think the idea that any random country can demand the extradition of someone who's never even been there should shock the conscience of anyone, especially considering he's facing a sentence of up to 150 years in federal prison. Again, there's no such thing as secondary criminal copyright infringement, but if he were sentenced to primary infringement in New Zealand, he'd get at most 15 years. Dotcom also argued that this constitutes an irreducible life sentence which violates international human rights law. They reject it because pardons are a thing. I kid you not. Dotcom can still appeal this to scons, and based on what we've seen in the past, he very likely will. As usual, we'll keep you updated.
Presenting the greatest game this side of Yugoth. You are H.P. Lovecraft's cat, and your name is Nick. Right, we can't say that on a podcast. Well, anyway, that's the point. Your name is a joke, so now you are out for revenge. You become a Necronomicat. Using the Necronomicon, you come to the present day to buy a cat. That's a gun. For a cat. It's a fat cat. But the Necronomicon is treacherous, and it led in Lovecraft's monsters. Now, in a crumbling world, you must fight. Build your team, buy guns and armor, buy items of dubious legality, defeat the bosses of each level, then take Lovecraft down. Play Necronomicat. The link is at cat.bogosity.tv. Yeah, we're doing cat.bogosity.tv, not That other one. What, you want me to get kicked off the internet or something?
Fair warning, this one is horrible in the most heartbreaking way. This podcast has taken the position in the past that VAERS just needs to end because it does far more harm than good. VAERS is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. If you think you've been harmed by a vaccine or had any sort of negative reaction following a vaccine, you can report it in VAERS. That's right, it's all self-reported with no causation or even confirmation. We've covered in the past the weird things that have showed up, such as vaccines causing alien abductions. In one case, a VAERS entry says that a vaccine caused someone to turn into the Incredible Hulk. VAERS does have a role to play in epidemiology, but every study your host has looked at that's relied on it has had to have so many caveats about the unreliability of the vaccine data. In fact, most of the serious studies rely on the VSD, Vaccine Safety Data Link. Unlike VAERS, vaccination records are confirmed and linked to electronic medical records with formal diagnoses instead of self-reports. It was VSD, not VAERS, that helped professionals link myocarditis as a rare adverse event of Moreno COVID vaccines. And there are several others as well. Of course, it's VAERS that's the darling of the anti-vax movement, since they can pull out all sorts of crazy information to support whatever conspiracy theory they want. More importantly, and more dangerously, it's been noted that increase in adverse events of a vaccine reported in VAERS aren't linked to a change in the vaccine or who's getting it, but rather to upcoming litigation against the company who makes it. Yes, most of the entries are made at the behest of ambulance chasers, essentially falsifying information. And this story shows one that's far more horrific than any of them. Andrea Shaw has received news attention and even podcast appearances after the deaths of her two 18-month-old twins, who, as reported in VAERS, died as a result of vaccines they received a week before their deaths. But Idaho News 2 in Boise reported a completely different version of the story. Quote, "The Payette Police Department announced the indictment of 23-year-old Andrea Shaw, formerly of Payette, on 2 counts of first-degree murder in connection with the deaths of her 18-month-old twins. Shaw was arrested by Boise police on June 30th. The newly released indictment accuses Shaw of suffocating both of her twins to death. Both charges are of murder in the first degree, meaning the prosecution is alleging that Shaw deliberately, with premeditation and with malice aforethought, killed both of her children, meaning she will be eligible for the death penalty, though the prosecution has not yet announced whether they intend to seek it. That's the result of a year-long investigation, during which time she appeared on the podcast for Children's Health Defense, the anti-vax organization associated with RFK Jr. CHD teamed up with Shaw to file a lawsuit against the American Academy of Pediatrics, claiming they misled the public about the safety of vaccines. After the indictment, they did not step away. In fact, they doubled down, implying that her arrest is really for daring to speak out against vaccines. These people are absolutely disgusting! I don't really have any more words than that, and I don't think I need any either.
I'm Brother Ezekiel, and I know how naughty thou hast been. So naughty, thou needst a VPN. Hide thy iniquity from prying eyes, and make sure the liturgical authorities remain ignorant. Take thy browser to vpn.bogosity.tv to get BoxPN. At $6.36 a month, a price only the most penurious would balk at, thou shalt have unlimited high-speed connections to servers all over the globe. And they don't log connections. Thy privacy is assured. That should please you sinners. Just remember, the Lord sees all. When traveling, make it look like thou art still home. At home, ensure the elders at your ISP don't take out their judgment with traffic shaping and DMCA notices. Up to 5 devices can connect at once, almost one for every deadly sin. Keep thy sins private. Go to vpn.bogosity.tv.
Okay, let's have some good news after that one. The transition to EVs is, understandably, coming with some anxieties, range anxiety being the biggest. With home charging and increasing numbers of charging stations, that's becoming less of an immediate concern, but there's still a long-term concern of how the batteries will degrade as the years go by. We have reports of EVs with 300 miles of range degrading below 250 or even 200. In fact, a survey from Auto Pacific showed that the number one reason customers avoid EVs is the fear of a battery replacement. But British Tesla owner Richard Simons found that when he took his 5-year-old Model 3 on a 260-mile road trip, he didn't need to stop once for a single charge, despite the fact that he's logged almost 250,000 miles on the battery pack. This mirrors what we're seeing overall. Initially, there will be a degradation, leading to an average 95% of the original mileage after 5 years. But it seems to plateau. From EVs built from 2022 on, only 0.3% have needed battery replacements. Early EVs such as the Nissan Leaf were a different matter, not only because of the battery technology, but they also lacked the battery cooling technology in newer EVs. That perception has persisted even as battery life has improved. The newer EVs just last longer, as long as combustion cars if not longer, even when driven a greater number of miles. Replacements are becoming easier as well. A full out-of-warranty battery replacement can range from $5,000 to $16,000, but manufacturers are increasingly allowing individual cells to be replaced instead of the entire battery pack. There are still caveats. Heavy DC fast charging will lose capacity faster than level 2 destination or home charging. Depending on the battery, the manufacturer might recommend charging to just 80%, which of course will reduce your range, and only charging to 100% when needed. It's also recommended not to let it get all the way down to 0. While it's true that range isn't as good in extreme cold or heat, people don't appreciate that this is also true of gas cars. Their mileage is just lower in extreme conditions, requiring more frequent fill-ups. The future is looking good for EVs. Although sales in the US have dropped 25% since Trump ended the EV subsidies, the market as a whole is starting to recover, and the share of new EVs is expected to double to 11% of all new car sales by 2030. Globally, they're 15% of new car sales and are expected to become 25% of the market by 2030. Tesla in particular is doing well in the US despite the slump, delivering over 450,000 cars in both quarters of 2026 so far. The average automaker delivers 406,000. It's a marathon, not a sprint, but as awareness rises, so will adoption. Better wear shades, 'cause the future's so bright. I want to tell you about the eyeglasses I've been wearing for years. As people can see on my videos, I have a very strong prescription, which makes glasses more expensive, especially when I need computer glasses, reading glasses, prescription sunglasses, and most expensively, progressive lenses for general everyday wear. To save money while still getting quality glasses, I get them from Firmoo. In fact, I just got a pair of progressives with high-index aspherical lenses and a nice pair of frames my wife loves for just over $100. It would have been $500 to get them through my eye doctor. Not only do they look good, the glasses are durable. I've worn many pairs for several years without problems. All orders come with a 30-day return policy, a 3-month warranty, and one-on-one customer service. Go to Firmoo, that's FIRMOO.Bogosity.tv anytime you need quality glasses at a low price. Once again, that's Firmoo.Bogosity.tv. And now it's time to photosynthesize this week's
biggest Bogon! Emitter!
And this week it goes to the American Lung Association for their position on nicotine pouches. Not patches, pouches. What is a nicotine pouch, you ask? I asked the same thing. I don't use nicotine at all, so it was a new one on me. They're these tiny cylindrical pouches that are just big enough to hold between your cheek and gum. Sorta like chew, but not. There's no tobacco leaf or stem or anything, just nicotine. That nicotine could be derived from tobacco, or it could be completely synthetic. The nicotine enters the bloodstream through the mucous membranes in the gums. There's no spitting, everything stays inside the pouch, and it's disposed of when used. Well, our story is another one that comes from Michael Siegel, who writes the Tobacco Analysis blog. He's an anti-smoking advocate who was one of the witnesses in the 1994 case Engel v. Liggett, a Florida suit against Big Tobacco that yielded smokers and their families $145 billion in punitive damages. The reason why was that the tobacco companies had lied about the effects of their products. They knew cigarettes were addictive and caused serious diseases and concealed or misrepresented those risks. Quick footnote so we don't digress too far. The Florida Supreme Court threw out the damages, saying that plaintiffs' conditions were too individualized for a class action. Sort of like I've been pointing out recently about class action copyright infringement cases. But instead of making every plaintiff start from scratch, they allowed the jury's Phase 1 findings to stand, allowing the difficult and critical causation findings to apply so they won't have to be litigated again. At any rate, back to the story. Now, the American Lung Association is complaining that the tobacco companies are telling the truth. You see, as confirmed by the FDA, using nicotine pouches instead of cigarettes, quote, puts you at a lower risk of mouth cancer, heart disease, lung cancer, stroke, emphysema, and chronic bronchitis. The FDA found that the pouches, in particular a product called Zen, quote, as actually used by consumers, would significantly reduce harm and the risk of tobacco-related disease to individual tobacco users and benefit the health of the population as a whole, taking into account both users of tobacco products and persons who do not currently use tobacco products. And the American Lung Association hit the ceiling, calling this, quote, appalling, and saying, quote, the Lung Association calls on the FDA to reverse this action. We must protect our children from a lifelong addiction to nicotine. Wow, went straight to, think of the children! That escalated quickly. But the pouches do pose a lower risk of cancer, COPD, and these other diseases. What good do they think it will do to deny people this information? Because they don't actually care about your lungs. They're prohibitionists, not healthcare professionals. Siegel wrote, what's actually appalling is that the American Lung Association would prefer that Swedish Match not be allowed to tell consumers that nicotine pouches are much safer than cigarette smoking. You would think that an organization devoted to preventing lung disease would want smokers to know that if they quit by switching to nicotine pouches, they will lower their risk for lung cancer and chronic lung disease. But for some reason, the American Lung Association is actually lobbying to get the FDA to forbid Swedish Match from telling consumers the truth. For example, one of the many testimonials the FDA received said, quote, I was a smoker for 10 years and a snuff since 1983. I found myself unable to quit tobacco for more than a few weeks at best. I switched to Zen a year ago, and it has been game-changing. To be blunt, I still get my nicotine, but not the cancer. It's fairly ludicrous to point at the risk of teenagers getting hooked on Zen as a risk factor, literally throwing out a valuable baby with the proverbial bathwater. This product is absolutely life-changer for the long-term nicotine junkie like myself. Siegel wrote, this is a great public disservice. It could potentially result in deaths that could otherwise have been prevented. After all, if reversing this FDA decision results in smokers not believing there is any health advantage to switching to nicotine pouches, then why should they bother switching? Might as well get the full enjoyment of your Marlboros if the tobacco-free, combustion-free alternative is no safer. In a statement to the FDA, the New Jersey Policy Institute said, quote, When adults are not provided with clear, evidence-based information, they often assume that all nicotine products carry comparable harms. That misperception can discourage individuals who are actively trying to choose products that expose them to fewer toxicants than cigarettes. Siegel, as usual, pulled no punches. Quote, "In public health, we have a code of ethics, and that code makes it clear that honesty and transparency are important core values. The principle of health communication should be to tell the truth. The ends do not justify the means. It is not ethical for us to achieve a public health aim by lying to the public." The FDA concluded that Zyn poses no significant risk of lung cancer. Actually, when you look at the science, there's no evidence it increases your cancer risk at all. Siegel concluded, "I find it appalling that the American Lung Association finds it appalling that the FDA is allowing Swedish Match to tell consumers the truth about the relative health risks of Zyn compared to combustible cigarettes. Reversing this decision would essentially force the company to lie to the public and to hide the single most important fact about the product that consumers need to know. Why in the world would we want Swedish Match to market Zyn as just another dangerous tobacco product for recreational use, rather than encourage smokers to switch to Zyn to save their lives?" Right on! I don't think anything more needs to be added to that, except, of course, that it makes the American Lung Association this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And now let's interdigitus and omnidirectionalize this week's
Idiot Extraordinaire!
The Social Security trustees have been making it clear for 20 years. Social Security is in trouble, and if something isn't done, then by the early 2030s, there won't be enough money to pay beneficiaries. And yet, politicians steadfastly refuse to do something about it, not even so much as instituting means testing. They've already raised the retirement age where the full retirement age is 67, with 62 being the minimum age to draw. Now, Senators Bernie Moreno and Elizabeth Warren have announced their fix: tax the rich! Specifically, eliminate the cap on Social Security taxes. Yes, I pointed out how dumb this was 11 years ago and how to argue for Social Security. Currently, you have 6.2% taken out of your paycheck to Social Security, and your employer contributes another 6.2%. That's a slick way of hiding the fact that you're paying the whole 12.4%. Which you can actually see if you're self-employed, because you gotta pay it all yourself. That's until you get up to $184,500. After that, you don't pay any more in Social Security taxes. But it also doesn't add to the benefits you receive either. Eliminating that would make 6.2%, or really 12.4% with half of it hidden from you, the top marginal tax rate. We have a major issue with the boomers comfortably in retirement age without a subsequent increase in population to sustain their payments. But as I showed, even without that, even if the population were constant, Social Security would still be unsustainable. Liabilities would rise exponentially until there'd be no way to pay anyone. The fact is, if you stuff that money into your mattress, it'd probably do better for you than Social Security. It's very unlikely to return what you paid into it. And that depends on who you are. If you're a black male, you haven't received what you paid in since the 1980s. It doesn't help that the over 65 demographic is the richest age demographic in America. Yes, Social Security is ultimately a transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich. The best alternative is, of course, privatizing it. Even low-risk annuities would give you several times the return that Social Security does. Canada's system isn't privatized, but it is a managed fund investing in private capital markets. It's a far superior system to ours. Or we could just do the ethical thing and abolish it altogether. That sends liberals into conniptions because some people won't save for their retirement. But the fact is that we have at least 2 generations who are expecting to receive next to nothing from Social Security anyway. But of all of those solutions, none of them would actually increase liabilities, except for Moreno and Warren's. Paying in more means you get to claim more when you retire, which means more and more of our Social Security dollars would be going to the rich. That's not taxing them, that's supporting them! So all of that makes Bernie Moreno and Elizabeth Warren this week's
Idiot Extraordinaire!
Well, that wraps up this Shayna. They bought their tickets. They knew what they were getting into. I say, let them crash edition of the Bogosity podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please go to donate.bogosity.tv for several ways to support and discord.bogosity.tv to join the discussion. Subscribe to the Discord, Patreon, or Subscribestar, and you can listen early and ad-free. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Harry Browne. Social Security operates on a very simple principle. Politicians take your money from you and squander it. The Bogosity podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Bogosity.